Do you think that reviewing some of the things that were taught back then would actually help people to understand what we need to fix now?
I don't want to be cliche, but we all know the cliche, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. So obviously, yes, as a historian, we always want to go back and review what was done back when. But the great thing about heritage studies is that we're just not looking at the past. We're trying to apply what we learned to the future. So yes, I think that's definitely going to be a part of my repertoire. Absolutely.
I'd kind of like to add to what Donna was talking, actually. And I mean, you don't even have to look at the 1920s textbooks to be shocked. You can look at 2020 textbooks to be shocked, particularly like events like, the glaring example is Elaine, and how people who live down the street from Elaine don't know the story of Elaine, Arkansas, and what happened there in the 20s. And then also to take your point about early history, like when I was reading, I come from outside the humanities, so I did a lot of reading early on. And when the history as a field was developing, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. When the fellow who considered the father of like the field of history, the study of history, was asking, one of the questions he posed to future researchers was that how the white planters' experiences with slavery, like they didn't even know to ask the question. So he said, instead of focusing on big individuals, and this was in the late 1800s, turn of the 20th century, the questions they were asking was, what was the white experience with slavery? Like they didn't even ask they didn't even know to ask the questions about, hey, maybe we should perhaps interview the slaves, the enslaved people, and like their stories. So huge gap. And then a lot of those people they're no longer with us. They've passed away. So a lot of, how history was taught in the 20s, like not only will it not hold the test of time, there's serious gaps that is perhaps lost forever because these stories were never collected. I think that name sounds familiar. Yeah, it's one of the papers I read, and when he talked about like don't just focus on the, and he was the progressive one back then, in that he said don't just look to the histories of the presidents and the great military leaders, look at the people's stories. And then a hypothetically question he poses was, you should talk to the people, the planters, about the experiences with slavery. Like he couldn't even get to think that there are actual human lives that were working, and it's not a question that computed. So, and this was like late 19th century, early 20th century. I'm misremembering the dates, but that stuck with me of how much that needs to change. And then if you look at like the current discourse with how history is taught, it's deeply political. So not only are not people thinking about how to teach a more full rounded version of history, there's actually active fighting against it. Like there are people resisting, like Du Bois and like Martin Luther King's writings are being taken off of books now by, it's like, so, and that is shocking. I think it's Idaho or Utah, one of the state legislatures like did this broad rule that banned certain books in high schools, which included writings of Martin Luther King Jr., which is insane to think about, but that's happening. So we don't even have to go to the 20s to look about the problems with teaching history. It's right here in the present.
We're running short on time. This was only slotted for an hour, and I'm thrilled that you all are here and engaging in all of this. But one of the takeaways from this for me is that we're talking about rural lives and the experiences of rural people. And that's another area that's often woefully overlooked. And one of the things that I emphasize in the work that I do is not to just look at rural suffering, and I'm talking about this across racial lines, it doesn't matter, but not just rural suffering, but also rural agency and rural empowerment. And we also have to think about the different kind of South we study, right? I grew up in the low country of South Carolina, as is my cousin, Dr. Marcy Washington, who's on right now. We grew up in the low country of South Carolina. And that is a very different experience from growing up in rural Arkansas. But these are all very rich and robust spaces with rich and robust histories that that we don't think about. So, you know, as you think about your projects and you're focusing on health and human rights and so on and so forth, and I think, Sweetie, you did a very good job of this. Everybody did a great job, by the way, but you really capture the fact that these people do exercise agency in these spaces. And even if you look at it from a 21st century perspective, it doesn't matter how impoverished the area is or with the food insecurity, housing insecurity, what have you, there is still agency and power in those spaces. And I think you really can get at that when you're talking to these people and allowing them to tell their stories rather than telling their stories for them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Johnson Burns. I want to thank you personally because I'm owed to you because your books are role model for my research. I'm really focusing on your books. And thank you so much. In this 21st century, we have written these books, and these are like such a great source for our research. Thank you again.
Well, no, thank you. Well, look, thank you for reading. Thank you for reading. And I look forward to getting my $10 residual check because you don't make any money off of academic books. But that was really a labor of love because these are stories that need to be told. And so I am absolutely thrilled that you all are doing this work and expanding the narrative, unearthing the narrative really, and making people aware of these fabulous people in these fabulous spaces.